Hi, everyone. This is Gloria Lara, and welcome to LEDA's first live stream conversation of the year, Conversations with Visionaries and Allies. We started these conversations in June of last year after George Floyd's death, and we've continued them every week until close to the end of the year. Now we are doing them the first and the third Wednesday of each month. These are both on our Facebook channel as well as on our YouTube channel. So you are able to access them through either our YouTube or Facebook, and also by going to our website, and I'll give that website address towards the end. So today, I'm really, really pleased to introduce someone that I work with and that I've had, we've had some laughs, but she's extremely dedicated to, to the vision as well as being an ally. I'd like to introduce Robyn Afrik. For those of you that don't know, she is the director for the Ottawa County Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. She's the first director for this office, which was just established in 2019. But Robyn has a lot of experience, more than a decade of experience, leading DE&I in multiple industries across the United States, which includes both for-profit and nonprofit. And she's developed and consulting on leading DEI frameworks for high-profile and global-level projects. She's also a speaker, a consultant, and author, a professor on issues related to DE&I. So, Robyn, welcome.
Hi, Gloria. Happy New Year.
Yes. So tell us a little bit more about how you got started. You grew up in the Holland, Zeeland area.
Yeah, grew up in the south side of Holland in the 70s, so that's going to date me a little bit. But for those who are tuning in and may have been from this area, you can probably smile at the context given that dynamic. But yeah, grew up in a very, I would say, Dutch German family, and I know you had mentioned too, Gloria, to talk a little bit about the adoption space, but that kind of gives the understanding of how I might look, what I do look like in a family that does not represent the same culture. So, yeah.
So what was it like growing up where you looked a little bit different than a lot of the people around you?
Yeah, I mean, so when you ask that question, what is it like growing up with people that didn't look like me? I think when you're in the moment or you're actually living through it, I don't know if you're able to, you might process it differently than I'm like what I'm doing now is looking back on it. So in the time that it was, we didn't really talk a lot about differences, and it would only be made known that I might look or be different based on whoever the majority was at the time, and they would ask me questions. So it was brought to my, cognition or my conscious that something was not the same. So,
yeah. Right. And, when you're a child, when you're a kid, you don't think that your experiences are different from anyone else's. I mean, they're just what happens to you and what you observe and how the people around you act. And you don't realize that there might be, there's something different that doesn't make, that doesn't make sense. So when did you become aware that there was a definite difference in people? I don't know, did people treat you differently as you were growing up, maybe a teenager or a young adult?
Yeah, I think, so I've had this question asked of me a couple times. I think when I was small, right, being one of very few minorities in a predominantly white setting, there were children who were on the playground that would maybe come up to me and ask me, why is your skin color a different color? So it was very overt at that age. And I think it was more of an observation. And there was no one there to say, don't ask that or please ask that. It was just, they wanted to know. So that was, some of those indications for me at that age that definitely I was different, right? And then I think as you get older, those kinds of I won't say hints, but those kinds of messaging comes out in different ways. We get a little bit more sophisticated with how we make people know that there's a difference and whether you are that person that represents that difference.
Right. And, what you said about, children coming out to you as a playground, I'm certain that you have felt this or have observed this before, is that, knowledge or awareness that someone is different and that isn't always a good thing, I think is with children, they pick up that attitude from the adults around them.
Right.
The older people.
You're saying how they understand it or learn to value or not value it is taught.
Right, because they're just making an observation that, your hair's black instead of blonde and your skin's a different color. But, that's just, a child making an observation. And that's very pure in a way to think about. Yeah.
Yeah, it's objective.
Right. And they didn't treat you any differently, or you didn't treat them any differently or anything. So it's just as we grow up that then we start realizing that there's like the DE&I aspect, the diversity, equity, and inclusion aspect. That's like, oh, am I supposed to act differently? Or are you supposed to treat me differently because of that? Right.
Yeah.
So you went to college, and you also have a master's degree, but you didn't always live in the Holland, Zeeland area after college. Can you talk a little bit about your journey through college and then what you wanted to be after you graduated?
So I think, growing up in the household that I did and the context and the community that I was raised in, I think that there was something to be said about, it wasn't so much what do you want to be, it was more about what kind of values do you want to exhibit depending on where you go and whatever you end up doing. So for me, it was reinforced quite a bit that, we are all about other people. We are supposed to be more about service, really looking at ways to help people. And there's a lot of overtones around leading with faith and, of course, a servant mindset. So having all of that reinforced growing up in the family that I did, you realize as you get outside of your home and you understand how the world of schooling and education works, there's actually ONET codes for this thing called the JOB. So I ended up talking to some counselors and they said, well, you have to pick a major. So I ended up moving into this field of social work. Social work to me felt like there was multiple avenues in which I could live out those values that were reinforced and taught to me growing up and finding a way to make an impact. So that's how that started. I chose to leave West Michigan, but I will say with all, tongue in cheek, I thought I was the big cheese moving to Indiana because, growing up for me in the 70s, our family, we didn't move much and we didn't travel. So to actually leave the state and leave my hometown, even if it was, 3 hours south, that was a big deal. But Valparaiso is where I ended up, and Valparaiso was also a very small town. It reminded me a lot of home. In the year I went, there was hardly anything there. So, that's where I ended up to start out with social work.
So, what was your first job after school in social work?
I would say first real career job, 8 to 5, right? I actually worked at the county doing this. Back then, it was called a North American Free Trade Act Trade Adjustment Assistance, or also known as NAFTA-TA. This was the time when our economy was hit heavily with all of our jobs going overseas to Mexico and Canada due to economic costs. And so I remember, that literally was helping people, right, trying to figure out how they can access this federal benefit to help them retool and go back to school and make a certain wage through J-O-B, that would help substantiate their families again. So that's what I did really as a first job.
I know and what's interesting, I think, if you talk to people, what they thought they would end up doing the rest of their lives is not what they're doing now. And do you find that in your case as well?
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, I think, you know, I never thought I would be doing the work I'm doing now in the profession that I'm doing. And I think I've shared this in other spaces, right? I didn't wake up one day and say, hey, let me become a DEI professional. I don't even think there was such a thing back in the times. There might have been, but it's obviously grown much more now, based on need and where our world is moving. And for me, it was more of a curiosity thing. It came out of a very personal space. It was me trying to understand, right, what is belonging, and how do I make sense of things that were not given or provided in its most natural state. So for me, that was my journey. That doesn't mean that's the journey for everybody, but looking to get into the space. But yeah, I never thought I would be doing what I'm doing right now. That's a long way of me explaining that.
Exactly. So you mentioned that you spoke at a conference over 10 years ago.
Yeah.
You never looked back.
Yeah.
Can you share with us about what that conference was and what road that placed you on?
Yeah, I think, so at the time when I did speak in that space, you have to understand too, right? I was already on a journey, still holding my 8 to 5. But I think that for me, it was a matter of understanding that the intersections of all of what I've been able to accumulate, the experiences that I've had, the mix of professional and personal, not just stories, but the experiences and the skills and things that I've learned from living out what you might call now diversity, equity, inclusion in some respects. That all culminated into a space that someone had asked, Robyn, I think you really, really need to get out there and help others, understand this from your point of view and your background. And so I didn't even want to speak at that conference. Actually, something happened where I was on the back end planning. I love to plan and help build and direct. And the main speaker at that time had gotten pneumonia or something happened, and the whole committee pushed me out and said, you need to get out there and share your message. So when I did that, then of course, understanding and seeing how many people and organizations and leaders were saying, whoa, never heard this before. What's this about? And that's kind of where it took off. And out of my own curiosity and out of some of the questions that I've had, it's led me to incredible leaders, not just local, but regionally, state, national. I've sat on projects that I can't replicate here. So it's been amazing.
That's great. Going back to that conference, can you share with us what were some of the things that you said that other people, the attendees said, wow, I never heard that? I mean, because it may seem very commonplace to people like you and I, but not necessarily to everyone. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, it's so long ago. I think, at the time, again, 10 plus years ago, and, being in West Michigan, there was a mixture of me talking a little bit, I think, around definitely about my adoption, about the narratives that exist in my growing up. So, for example, I know one of the questions you had for me, Gloria, asked about, how, when you grow up in West Michigan, represented who you are today, how does that impact you, and how does that inform you a little bit about who you are? So while I shared with you about the fact that these value sets, right, me wanting to learn how to help people and to really live into, being of service, no one ever asked the question growing up, well, what does that mean when it's only a certain group of people living out that service to other people? Or as a woman and a woman of color, right, who I identify as, what does that look like, right, when you are helping or serving other people? There's these existing narratives that don't ever get asked. And so, dissecting some of that was what some of that conference was about. And I think that it brought a lot of people into this space of, wow, I think I may be doing something really good, but I might be actually challenging another narrative that is not helping us get to where we need to be when we talk about inclusion. I don't know if that helps or if that makes it confusing, but.
Well, because remember what I said earlier about when you're a child and you grow up and everyone's, you're looking at things the same way. And I think that's it's very, similar to a lot of us as adults. We keep forgetting that our point of view isn't always everyone's point of view, or our experiences isn't everyone else's experiences. And I think that that's one of the bases of diversity, equity, and inclusion work is trying to have people understand, okay, I'm going to age myself, where the other person is coming from, an old 60s term,
Yeah, no, and I mean, and I think I've shared this before too, when we were on the 21-day equity challenge, right?
Right. Yeah.
And the fact that, if you are in a homogenous community, right, where you might be literally the minority and there is a majority, and that majority identity happens to represent something else, right? I think that if there's no consciousness to that, then it's going to be really hard to foster a culture of inclusion. So for me, right, being one of very few minorities, the only time I ever saw other minorities, they were either other adoptees, refugees, or mission projects. That was my framework. And doesn't take away from the good that was being done, right? It's just that, does anyone ask those questions? What does it really mean if that's all you're seeing? So, and it goes back to what you said too, Gloria, right? It's a very objective view, but then how are we teaching what that value or that meaning is?
Right. So Robyn, can you, in your journey over the past 10 years or so, I'm certain that you must have had some unusual or impactful experiences. Can you share a couple of them with us?
Yeah, impactful or unusual experiences. I gotta think, there's quite a few. There was a year when, so of all places, there was a city called Dubuque, Iowa, that had called and asked me to come present to their entire city on MLK Day to be their speaker about, diversity, adoption, all these pieces, and then to work with all of their leaders in Dubuque shortly afterwards, including their police, their librarians, etc. And historically in that community, right, there were outbreaks that were occurring, racial outbreaks that were happening during that time. And that community actually had an opportunity to do an entire assessment on their city and try to understand ways that they could move the needle and improving some of these relations. And I just remember getting this call right before I was supposed to fly out to present. And they said, Robyn, we just want to let you know that, we got the report back and we were sharing this publicly, and there's been some major outbreaks happening right before you come. And so I remember having this moment of realizing, me stepping into these spaces and represented who I am and having to bring clarity around some of those challenges. It was a very defining moment for me, and again, growing up in this community, I had never been taught how to deal with that. Usually you call somebody and you say, please handle this for me, but having to step into those very messy spaces and working with people and figuring out a solution forward. It was a very unique time for me, and well appreciated, because obviously it's been feeding into the work I'm doing even now or today.
Yeah, that must have been a little bit off-putting as you were going in. You had no idea what you're going into. So I'm trying to look something up, because you had a very interesting experience of going to Africa.
Oh, yeah. I've traveled to Senegal, West Africa. That's where originally my husband and his family are from. Let me qualify that. They're originally from Sierra Leone, but grew up in Senegal. So we got to live there for some time. And I think again, the culmination of all the things that I've been experiencing and traveling and doing this work all over, was a monumental space to go home and live and breathe in that environment and try to understand, what that culture was like. We did a lot of, again, what I've shared before was Sankofa trips. So being able to go to Glory Island and understanding the historical context around slaves and slavery in the American space, so there's a lot of experiences in that.
So for those of our viewers and hopefully listeners, once this gets turned into a podcast, can you explain what a Sankofa trip is?
Yeah, Sankofa actually is a West African word, and there's a symbol of a bird. It's actually a symbol of a bird, and it's flying forward, but the head of the bird is looking back. So it really means we're moving ahead while also looking back, and meaning we got to pay attention to the history and understand, what mistakes have been having, or what it is that we want to learn before or as we move forward. So there are these things called Sankofa trips, and they're very powerful. I've been on at least 3 or 4 of them. I've led a couple of them myself. They're highly relational and very engaging. I will say too, though, that depending on how you craft them, you have to be careful, because some of that burden can lie or rest on individuals of color having to do some of that teaching, but that's part of curating these spaces. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's not a term that most people run across, and so I wanted to also take this opportunity to provide a little bit of education, because that's what being an ally and a visionary is to help people understand, but also, like you said, lead forward. And I really like that image of the bird flying forward but looking backwards, to see where you come from. So that's powerful. So now let's bring it closer to home. You've been back in West Michigan for some time now, and you're the first director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Ottawa County, which, from looking at the data and the census, you might wonder, well, why does Ottawa County need a DE&I department and officer? How and why did your office become established?
Yeah, so Al Vandenberg, right, county administrator, he really was the impetus for starting this. He had the 4 Cs initiative for the county well before I was here, back in, I think, 2013, and one of those 4 Cs was cultural intelligence. So as part of his overall vision and work for the county, he was obviously thinking of customer first. And, before you can serve your customers who have very diverse backgrounds and needs, I think that he wanted to make sure that his employees also knew how to service that. So training happened, and, believe it or not, Gloria, LEDA was definitely a very big part of that initial journey. And I think whenever you start a journey like that, and knowing who Al is as a leader, the question became, how do we keep this work moving forward without it becoming either a check the box, or, now that we've trained everybody, what now, what next? And so in 2018, obviously with the Board of Commissioners blessing and the backing from our community stakeholders, that includes businesses, foundations, organizations, individual donors, so many of them have come forward. And Gloria, you're in this work too, so there's that dynamic of, why do we need it? There's multiple reasons why people come to the table for DEI, and, it's definitely, there's a piece of economic prosperity. I'm not going to lie about that. And a lot of our businesses are saying, how do we become that premier talent attraction? We can't retain diverse talent, and diversity is not just people of color. You and I know that. It's an intersection of multiple things. And they're trying to understand how a community can retain all of that talent. So there's that piece as well.
Great. Let me just take a little detour. You mentioned the word intersection, and there's a terminology that people are sort of starting to wonder about what it means and what intersectionality means in the terms of DE&I. Can you talk a little bit about that
I can try. I feel
I
like
mean,
the terms flip so many times. I probably don't have it all right either, but I've learned it as more or less being, we are in our identities, we are an intersection of so many things, right? So just because I might present physically as a woman or a female, and then the fact that I am of color, there could be multiple aspects to me besides just those two items. So how you identify gender-wise, your sexuality, your religion, your disability abilities. You've got, economic. There's so many pieces to that. And so how we show up and create either programming or decision-making based on that intersectionality versus a singular piece really can inform the way we do DEI work.
right. And so DE&I, diversity, equity, and inclusion work, is not predicated on just one, where's my hand? There are one or two different aspects, but we must take into consideration the entirety of a person or an organization, and realizing that everyone's unique, even though they may look similar.
Right. No, totally true. And I think, the other challenge, right, I think you know this too, Gloria, in DEI work, is the definitions matter. You and I could come to the table and we can both say the word diversity and have two different things or two different understandings as we're moving forward and building that work, right?
Right. Yeah, and so that's why, I think one of the beginnings when you do DE&I work, and I'm certain, Robyn, that you do this, is, coming to a common understanding of the definitions in that context that you're working in.
Well, we try.
Yeah, I mean, exactly.
We try. But
So,
that's the joy of this work, right?
Yeah, exactly. I think one day someone will probably, run something past me and it'll be like, well, I've never heard of that before, but yeah, that.
Yeah, well, and LEDA's done a great job. I mean, ever since day one, LEDA's been a big part of my life prior to any of this work too. And I will give LEDA credit in that sense. There's a lot of great understandings and definitions in the teachings that you guys do, especially in the community, right?
Well, thank you for that call out. I'm just fairly new to LEDA, but I don't know if you realize that we are starting, this year is our 25th year.
You're young.
I know, but for an organization like this.
I'm kidding though. I know, I totally get it. And in the context that you're in and the realities of what we're facing, yes, I get that.
And just keep moving forward on that. So on a related topic, can you please tell us what GARE, G-A-R-E, is and what it does?
Yes, I can do that for you, Gloria. So GARE is the Government Alliance Race and Equity. They're a national organization. I believe they're a nonprofit, and they are set up to support governments, municipalities, cities, townships, villages, et cetera, who are looking to do racial equity work. And they create a whole entire network across, again, the US, working individually, but also getting like-minded or those who are on this journey to share resources. It's an open network source. There are cohorts that have formed on all levels that you can imagine. And yeah, they've even had a COVID rapid response group meeting to try to figure out how do we respond in a way that's equitable before just throwing money into a pot. So it's a great resource. They're well known, and if memory serves me correctly too, Gloria, prior I think to you being even there, LEDA brought in GARE, I want to say, and I think that's how the county got involved. Again, before I got here, there was a partnership that formed. And we brought them in for the diversity forum this past year based on the survey results from our community feeding back to our committee. What do we want to focus on in light of all what's going on?
Great. Thank you again for that call. But let's go back to that survey. What are some of those highlights or high points of that survey that the community responded to?
Yeah, I think so. When we sent out that survey, the top 3 areas were health because of COVID, right? The second was race relations or racial equity, which I feel like that's been something in our community for a very long time. And then there was some in between there. There were categories like the police, obviously with what was happening. There was things around immigration. There was things around, gosh, it was a while ago. I think even some of the age thing, but I'll have to go back and check. But definitely those were the things. So our committee had to obviously pull together and determine from that what are the top 2 that we wanted to cover.
So let's take a little deeper dive into specifically what's going on within the county that your office is leading. Can you share with us a little bit about that?
Yep. So again, when the office was created, it had 5 goals. And I can tell you, because it's just moi, I've had the ability to focus on 3 of those 5, COVID pending. So the big one was establishing and leading a diversity, equity, inclusion strategy for Ottawa County. And I will be able to satisfactorily say, after 9 months, we have a DEI strategic framework, and we had a whole slew of work that went on behind the scenes with an incredible DEI work group team. We were able to do focus groups, and we were able to do a countywide assessment and audit. There was a lot of work that went into that. So we're just now finalizing that report, and we're actually going to be working with the Board of Commissioners on that this month. And then the other thing that we're working on is to partner. The second goal is to partner with our local municipalities, townships, and villages. So prior to 2021, we had an initial meeting with quite a few of our stakeholders and said, how do we move collectively, and how do we move this work forward in your organizations? So meeting number 2 is coming up this 2021, and we're going to figure out how to create that space. We've got some resources and tools that we've created to bring everyone along on the journey. We've created a steering committee. There's a lot of things that have been happening in that space as well. And then the other piece that just got named was the G4G grant, the Welcoming New Americans. And that was a really big win for our county as well. So we're going to be rolling that out. We're going to get a data set that's going to help us understand the economic contributions that immigrants, refugees, and new Americans have contributed to Ottawa County, and where are some of those opportunities to create strategies and how to partner. There's a whole host of other things that have been going on, but those are 3 big ones, I guess I could say.
So I'm curious, when you met with all these different communities, has there been resistance or people sitting there with their arms crossed, or did anyone have to be, bring people along to sort of say, hey, this is something that we really need to focus on?
Well, Gloria, this is West Michigan, so we don't always cross our arms. No, I will say this. For our municipalities, townships, and villages, we've prior, again, to this office being here, I know Al had talked quite a bit with the area here, and a lot of them have said, yes, we want to figure out how we can partner with the county to do this work, and what are the resources that we can begin to share and leverage. And so that has been great. And, if there are some individuals who are not quite at that space, I think Joe Matthews said it well. There's going to be people who will follow very close, and there's going to be people who are going to follow from pretty far away, and that's okay. So we will work with the ones who are willing to obviously move the ball forward. So
speaking of willing to work with the ones that are willing to move forward, besides municipalities getting involved, are there avenues that regular county residents can participate in or can do along these lines to focus in on the DE&I?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you mean to start their journey and things?
Right. I mean, relating to the county in your efforts to sort of help, expand what you are doing.
Yeah, I think so. Yes, if there's a resident out there that really is saying, "Hey, how do we get involved?" Right? I think big one is, come serve on some of these committees, get involved in your government process, right? Figure out what is happening and with the different departments and programs that, you're trying to find out where their equity space is. I think just getting involved is huge. The other piece too, there's other avenues or on-ramps. There are so many diversity, equity, inclusion people doing this work locally, organizations like yours, obviously, right, Gloria, that we partner and we do so many projects. And so there's ways to volunteer, there's ways to give your money, there's ways to, advocate. And, I think that just being able to get involved in those spaces will bleed and lead into some of this work, whether it's direct or indirect. I also will say this too, there are groups and there's people in this community that have been doing this work long before you and I have showed up. And there are always going to be people in this community that will do this work with or without a job title. And so I encourage individuals who are saying, how can I get involved, to search out for those individuals and organizations as well, because this work is so big. I think we need everybody at that table, but sometimes they get missed. And so it's really important.
Yeah, right. I mean, thank you for that. So let's start winding it down. So
that's my clue.
No, it's not your clue, but that's your clue to give your, are there any parting thoughts or visions that you'd like to share? First of all, your vision for maybe 5 years from now, and then we'll move on from there.
So this is the funny thing, and I've heard this said before, you really hope to not have to do this work in 5 years. Now, that doesn't mean get rid of it tomorrow, because this journey is forever, but I think the goal is to be so diverse, inclusive, and equitable that we don't need someone to help, quote unquote, lead or to urge or to spur on. Now, we also know, at least for those who are in this space, that journey, this is a journey. We will never technically probably get there, at least in my lifetime. But I think it's a worthy goal to have or to keep in front of you. And the other thing I'll share too, that I've been learning along the way, and I've been learning a lot from people here as well. I'll even quote my own boss, Al, right, who, shared with me one day how, he said, there's this dynamic around what we call people are afraid of change. And he said, but, if I were to tell you, Gloria, tomorrow I'm going to give you $1 million, I don't think you'd be upset at that. But the reality is that's change. That's a change. And so it's not so much that we fear change. I think it's a matter of we might fear what we will or won't get. And sometimes people don't understand that diversity, equity, inclusion is not a game of deficit. That's the problem I think people look at. It's actually a game of abundance. It's benefiting everybody. And, so if we can switch that thought or understand it from that perspective, I think everybody will help us get to that vision sooner.
I mean, it's something, that I've always said is it's not taken away from one group or another, but how can we together make the pie bigger?
Yeah.
So everyone gets, a bigger piece and a bigger share. And I think by working together, and that's what you're, alluding to, Robyn, is doing that. So are there any final thoughts that you would care to share with us? This is your time.
I know, sorry. Other than that, those two final thoughts, no, I think, just a reminder, right, that there's this reminder, right, that everybody does have an honest part to play in this work. And so, coming to recognize that and owning that is huge, especially at the first start. And the other piece is I can't do this work by myself. I know, Gloria, you probably can't either. It will literally take everybody. And so that's the thing, that when I go out into these spaces, and our office has had probably over 50 multi-collaborative partnerships and different up to 90 contacts in the first 60 days of this office being here, it says that there are people who really want to see this happen and really for the benefit of everybody. So yeah, I don't know if that's parting words, but yeah.
Oh, great, Robyn. I I enjoy working with you and with Ottawa County, and I think the more that like-minded people can work together and collaborate, I think it's so much more powerful than each of us working individually in our own little, silos or tunnels, but rather building bridges across and being able to get great ideas from all of us, because I think we all have really great thoughts and ideas, but sometimes it becomes harder to implement because there's just not enough of us.
That's true too.
Yeah. So, Robyn, thank you so much for being on the first one of the year.
Yeah, right. No pressure.
And so, if you can just hang around for a couple minutes while I finish up, please.
Sure, no problem.
Great. Thanks, Robyn. And thank you, everyone, for being on and viewing and listening to our first show of 2021. Our next one is on Wednesday, January 20th. I already have a very fascinating guest lined up. And just keep an eye on our Facebook page and on our YouTube channel for that notification, which will probably go out within a day or two. So until then, thank you so much, and we'll see you on the 20th.